were written much. The Gospels were written much later, after Jesus had left the scene, by a few decades later. The earliest of the four Gospels is that of Mark, that was written around the year 70. Aslan says sometime after 70, shortly after that. And this would be about 4 decades after Jesus had left the scene. And Matthew and Luke were written, according to Aslan again, somewhere between the years 80 to 100. And John's Gospel, the last of them, somewhere between 100 to 120. So much later still. Now, in the intervening time, what has happened is that the Romans came in and completely destroyed Jerusalem and its inhabitants. So the surviving Jews found it necessary for them to think of their faith as something that they could live with under this tremendous force of Roman occupation. And what they found convenient for them was at the time to not promote their faith as something that would rub contrary to the demands of the state. Christians at the time were one movement within Judaism. This was a Jewish following that believed that their Messiah had come in the person of Jesus Christ, but still a Jewish following. And so if they were also under scrutiny of the Roman rulers, who were looking for anyone who would be zealous in that way and who would pose a threat to Roman rule. And the best way forward for the writers that represented Jesus, such as Mark, for example, would be to represent Jesus as being non-threatening to the Roman state. And this is how Jesus has received. So his
image evolved then?
Yes, his image has evolved in the minds of the Christian congregations that produced the documents that we now have about Jesus.
So in other words, the Jesus of the past might have been similar to what we know of Muhammad today. Muhammad being, a political reformer, wanting to establish a sort of state or a Muslim polity of some sort.
This is a very complex question, and I don't know if I can give a simple answer to that, because it's another question as to what was the Prophet Muhammad's own agenda. And I would argue, as I've explained elsewhere and on this show as well, that in my reading of the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, I see him as the Quran depicts him, as a prophet like previous prophets, and the Quran does not depict Jesus as a revolutionary. Nor does the Quran depict other prophets as revolutionaries. There are only a few prophets in the Quran who actually ruled states. The notable exceptions would be Moses, David, and Solomon. Even Abraham is shown in the Bible to have gone into battle, but in the Quran, he's not shown to have gone into battle.
So then, do you think that, to go back to Reza Aslan's book, do you think that his book is an inaccurate representation of Jesus?
No, I would say that what is known among scholars in the field of historical studies about Jesus fits very well with what Reza Aslan has depicted. The Gospels are the main source of knowledge about Jesus, and they contain many threads of evidence. Because the Gospels are written by many different individuals who also collected stories that were available to them, and the stories come from different strands of thinking. Surely the stories coalesce around certain themes. Various writers have their own sort of expectations, and they gather stories that would fit those expectations and represent Jesus in 4 different ways in the 4 Gospels. But nevertheless, one can see that there, within the Gospels, first of all, among the four Gospels, we have four distinct basic images, and then within each Gospel, you have a collection of various ideas reflected in individual stories and short episodes. So now, to sort out who Jesus was behind all of these stories. So if we take these stories and the Gospels themselves as layers of interpretation of Jesus, then to peel back these layers of interpretation and find Jesus behind, this becomes quite a puzzle for scholars. And it is often remarked that when scholars find Jesus and they give us a depiction of who Jesus was, the scholar often really is depicting a projection of his own mind, because the scholar does not have that much facts about Jesus, that many facts, and the scholar has to work with a few facts selected from a wider pool, and the selection itself of the facts to say, well, this is what we know about Jesus, that selection itself reflects a sort of orientation of the individual scholar.
So do you think that's the case with Reza Aslan as well? His depiction of Jesus is a representation of what, of his own predisposition, perhaps?
Well, I wouldn't say that in his case, or in the case of any particular scholar, but every scholar should be aware that we all have our own biases and expectations and so on, and nobody is completely neutral. And in that case, I find his resistance, though on the one hand, in the Fox News interview, there was the continued probing, you're a Muslim, why are you writing a book about Jesus, as though that is so incomprehensible. On the other extreme, we have him protesting that his Muslimness has nothing to do with it. Well, to be sure, his book does not reflect a Muslim sort of predisposition. But
the Jesus that he depicts is very different from the Muslim understanding.
Yes, and he did say that in